Well, building the Canadian dream, and we get to do an interview with another political candidate. I have with me Errol Povah. Did I say that right?
Povah.
Povah. Errol Povah. Now you're running as an independent in the Richmond Queensbourgh riding.
That's correct.
Now listen, Earl, I've already had a good chance to talk to you about some of your key passions, and one of them would be how COVID was handled. And we all know the atrocities of the past, but I think the really big thing is how can we do things different next time? So you mentioned that there was a very good pandemic plan in the past developed by our military, etc., and that got discharged, and people like Bonnie Henry just did her own thing. Please explain that, and if you can, repeat what I just said so that it's a complete paragraph.
Understood. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Bill. When the COVID pandemic arrived, for all intents and purposes, Bonnie Henry took charge of the pandemic response here in BC. Theresa Tam at the federal level, Anthony Fauci in the U.S., Fraudchi, as I prefer to call him.
I understand he made a lot of money. Yes.
Anthony Fauci has made a few dollars. I have no way of determining how much he has, but I'm guessing has become a billionaire as a result
of
what I hear. Thanks from Big Pharma alone. COVID hit, and Bonnie Henry and all of the other provincial health officers across the country, Theresa Tam again at the federal level, they all threw these long-established pandemic plans out the window. Lieutenant Colonel David Redman, high-ranking military officer, his entire career, he was involved in emergency preparedness, and he had a specific focus on pandemics. And working with provincial, territorial, federal governments in both Canada and the U.S., they all working together, they developed these pandemic plans. And March 11th of 2020 rolls around, and Bonnie Henry and all the rest of them threw those plans out the window and did exactly what those plans said not to do. Wow. One of the things that they said not to do, and specifically putting a bureaucrat like Bonnie Henry, an unelected bureaucrat, in charge of pandemic response. And hundreds, depending on the jurisdiction you're talking about, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives as a result of that decision to throw those pandemic plans out the window.
So what is the solution for, let's say in one time there's going to be another pandemic, I'm sure there will be, but what would be a better solution for the next time, how to manage that?
Well, we need to dismantle the current governments. They are corrupt beyond repair. And that's why I'm running specifically as an independent. And the independent movement is catching on big time.
And listen, that's interesting. Like, we do know that David Eby's government, it seems like the entire caucus, his caucus, needs to vote for every bill without any challenge, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So do we have a democracy there, or is that a dictatorship?
I would certainly lean, it's a dictatorship, Bill.
Right. Now, I'm so happy to meet you and do an interview, but I got to tell you, I invited all of the NDP clients 2-3 times for interviews, and guess how many have responded for a free interview?
My guess is 0.
You're absolutely right. So not only when there's an issue to vote on in the legislature, the current government says everybody must vote for Bill 36, and they all do. And I don't know if they've read it, but they all vote for it. And then when they go to explain their situation to the journalist, they're going, no, you can't talk to anybody either. Right?
Yeah. There's no accountability with these. I describe all of the mainstream parties as corrupt. They're all corrupt. And I often ask people, I say, well, people who for whatever reason reject the idea of independence candidates, they say, oh, I'm gonna plug my nose and vote for Rustat or whoever it is they're going to vote for. And I ask them, I say, which flavor of corruption do you prefer? The blue flavor, the red, the orange, the green? They're all corrupt. They just play musical chairs every 4 years or every 8 years.
Okay, well, I will say it's a wonderful feeling to say somebody has the freedom to vote for their constituency and challenge legislation on the table. And, I think in general, when COVID came along, that all governments were in emergency mode and they shut down all freedoms of speech and said, we are the boss, you have to do this. But COVID's been over for multiple years and they have not restored that freedom of speech. Am I right?
Absolutely. And yeah, again, bearing in mind that it's established fact now that COVID was nothing worse than a typical flu. The vast majority of the people who died from COVID were elderly people with 4 or more comorbidities.
Yeah.
So why were we putting masks on little kids and nothing worked? Nothing worked. As my T-shirt demonstrates here, it was all BS, if I may use that term, and I would go even further and call it a crime against humanity.
Now listen, our new solution for the next pandemic that arrives is to have a more open plan, or what would you say? How do we move forward?
Well, again, without a drastic change in governments and institutions, when I say institutions, I'm referring to the World Health Organization, the UN, the CDC, the FDA, Health Canada. Mm-hmm. Without a drastic change in any or all of those organizations and governments, I would suggest there's little or no hope.
Well, let's just say there's 15 independents in the BC legislature this coming election. I would assume that all 15 of those would be able to freely challenge a government bill and actually challenge it. That freedom has not happened in the last 4 years, right?
Right. Yeah. Opposition, in my opinion, is impotent. Opposition parties at whatever level of government, provincial or federal, they go through the motions of pretending to oppose the government, but in reality, they do little or nothing. They're all in cahoots. Okay. Ultimately.
Well, listen, not to be too discouraged, we have to change WHO and the UN and Klaus Schwab's organization,
World Economic Forum.
Yeah, which is going to be a daunting task. But at least in the BC legislature, that we do not pass Bill 36 without a good reading and without people being able to voice their opposition. Am I right or wrong?
You're right. That bill was passed. I'm forgetting the exact title of it. I believe it was the Health Professionals Act or something along those lines. But yeah, it prohibits healthcare professionals, your family doctor, whoever. It prohibits them from saying anything outside of the narrative on COVID, regarding COVID. If they dare to suggest that ivermectin might help you, they risk being reported, and they can be reported anonymously.
You know, I met a doctor in probably Osoyoos that did quit himself, but he said if you say anything against the government narrative, like maybe ivermectin could work, right? That it was either a 6-month jail or a $200,000 fine, and you lose your license and you'll never be able to practice anywhere in the world. Like you get blacklisted for life. And I'm going, wow. And I will say myself, Errol, is I would really like to hear my own doctor's opinion on anything I do regarding my health, and to have his mouth shut is, to me, a horrible loss of rights. I would at least like to hear what he has to say.
Absolutely. The government has no place in the doctor's office. The relationship between a doctor and a patient should be exclusive and confidential, and both parties should be free to say whatever's on their mind. The government has no place there whatsoever, but they've inserted themselves, and so many people, even so-called government officials, will scratch their heads and wonder why our healthcare system is in crisis. Well, 3 guesses, guys. Bill 36 caused a hell of a lot of healthcare professionals to just leave the province.
Yeah.
They refuse to work under those conditions. And that's in addition to I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 who were fired for refusing what I call the clot shot.
Yeah, no.
And why?
From what I understand, BC was the only province, 4 months ago, that never restored the doctors and nurses in this province that had not taken the COVID shot. And the only other spot in the entire world, and I believe Congo, that did not restore their doctors. So, boy, this is one tough province for administering authoritarianism, right?
And yet Bonnie Henry would have us all believe that she did a wonderful thing when she rescinded the mandate from the government. In her very next breath, she said healthcare professionals will still be required to provide their vaccination status to their colleges.
Right.
They're just passing the buck to the colleges, and if each of the colleges decide that healthcare professionals still need to be fully up to date on their clot shots, then nothing has changed.
Okay.
Ultimately.
Well, bottom line, I do believe to have free voices in the legislature is a very big start. Finally, somebody gets to speak up in opposition to something that is important to their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
So when the constituents vote to put someone in government, they hope they put someone there that has a mouth, not have a taped mouth.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So listen, let's talk about, let's say SOGI 1, 2, 3. So there you go. So who should be telling a child whether or not Santa Claus exists? Is it the parents or the government?
It should always be the parents.
So parents should still have a role in raising children.
Absolutely. Yeah. What a concept, right? Parents involved in raising their kids. As I mentioned previously, I'm aware of at least 2 pretty high-level politicians. I'm not even remembering exactly where they're from, but they clearly stated that they don't believe that parents own their children, the government does. And that made my blood boil. And whether David Eby or anybody else ever actually verbalizes that and says it themselves, it's abundantly clear to me that that's how they feel as well. And especially in the case of SOGI, the government believes they're fully on board with the SOGI garbage.
It's interesting. If a government's in charge and fully responsible for children, let's just say that's an okay idea, except every 4 years it switched to another government. So whatever this government thinks is right, the other government thinks something else is right. So it's like government should not, I always personally say government should never be in charge of businesses. They would do a terrible job building a building.
Of course.
They build a beautiful building and there's no front door to it. And it took 10 times longer, it cost 5 times more. right? Like, please do not put government in charge of building something.
Or they would build something, and when it was completed, they say, oops, we forgot the foundation.
Yeah, no, it's just a crazy, yeah, no. So, I mean, I've seen so many examples of extreme cost overruns. And, I think anyhow, I could give many examples, but bottom line is, for government to also be in charge of children, that's a big step. Give parents their rights. Parents should have rights.
Absolutely.
So we just had the March for Million yesterday, a couple of days ago, right? And a lot of parents standing up that I want to tell my child whether or not there's a Santa Claus or whether they can change their sex, right? So Earl, in reference to how much control government has over controlling our children, like who should be the ones to say whether or not Santa Claus exists? Is it the parent or the government? What do you think?
In terms of government control over children, and whether it's the government or the kids who determine for the kid whether there's a Santa Claus or not, or what gender they are, that stuff is 100% the responsibility of the parents. The teachers, the government, I want to leave the government out of this. And I know technically teachers are part of the government, but the role of the teacher is to teach math, English, science, geography, etc., finances. I never learned a thing about finances in school.
So an adult, free to make all their own decisions. A 6-year-old should be protected. Regurgitate that.
Yeah, adults are free to, if they decide they're in the wrong body and they want to get gender reassignment surgery, go for it. I don't oppose that at all. Young children should not be indoctrinated and persuaded that if a little girl likes to play with dump trucks, she should not be told she's in the wrong body, put on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and in the worst cases, surgery. Same with a little boy. If a little boy likes to play with dolls, don't tell him he's in the wrong body. Put him on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and in surgery. That's criminal. The vast majority of those kids will grow up to be perfectly normal, heterosexual kids.
Adults can make their own decisions. As a young child, their brain is not capable of making those decisions. It's like, in fact, I think of, you talk to any 12-year-old kid, one day they're going to be a fireman, next week they're going to be an airline pilot, the next week they're going to play guitar on the beach, right? They change their life philosophy every 2 weeks, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
They're in love today and in love with somebody else tomorrow, right?
Of course. And yes, children's minds are constantly changing and exploring, and they see, oh, I like that, and oh, I like that better, and they can't make decisions, lifelong decisions about their bodies. Yeah.
Okay, well, bottom line is parents need to have a role in raising their children, and the government needs to step out. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Governments have no place in children's lives other than to provide the basics: housing, food, and education.
Yeah.
That should be the extent of government involvement in children's lives.
Okay.
This soji and it can only, some people describe it as a type of education. Some will even call it sex education. It's got nothing to do with sex education. It's pornography.
Okay.
It's indoctrination.
So, Earl, another issue, which I know you're passionate about, but we are now collecting $2.3 billion, $2.6 billion per year in carbon tax. So how many carbon particles of that taken out of the air? How much did they do to save the world? Help me out on this.
Well, I'm going to guess very similar to the number of NDP MLAs who took you up on your offer to interview them. I'm going to guess zero.
So all that money went where?
Into the atmosphere up there with the
Okay.
carbon dioxide and.
So the government's collected this $2.6 billion in the last year, and it's penalized farmers. Everybody's paying their 61 cents carbon tax on their liter of fuel. And to what purpose other than a tax
grab?
Tax grab.
The carbon tax is a tax grab. And I honestly don't know all of the nuts and bolts of it. I haven't really looked into it deeply. I do know that Pierre Poilievre is centering his election campaign around Axe the Tax. And Justin Trudeau, on the other hand, would have us all believe that we get rebates back and they balance everything out, which is the old robbing from Peter to pay Paul kind of idea, or to convince us that the government's really doing something, and it's insanity. And if we achieve Justin Trudeau's goal of zero carbon, I have to ask what's going to happen to the trees? Isn't carbon, like carbon dioxide, tree food? Isn't that what trees take in carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen?
Interesting. I don't think anybody's got the real answer here, but some would say that carbon dioxide, extra carbon dioxide has made the earth a lot greener, and the lungs of the earth are a lot bigger. So the Gobi Desert and the Sahara Desert have greened up around the edges. They're shrinking. So carbon dioxide is sort of like the food for plants, is it not?
Absolutely.
So,
and the plants in turn, and trees in turn, producing oxygen, keep us alive.
Yeah, so very interesting. I'm not saying I know anything, but I will say I think we have to admit a typical coal electrical generator does cause the majority of the pollution. And I believe India and China are producing a new coal generator every 2 weeks, or two every week. And so that's a major source of China's huge increase of pollution. And guess where the coal comes from?
The coal and the oil come from Canada. Maybe not so much oil yet, but once the TMX pipeline is completed.
Well, the dirtiest fuel of coal, a big chunk of it comes from BC.
Absolutely.
So if we're really talking about saving the environment, why are we selling coal?
Exactly.
From what I understand, we have one of the largest natural gas reserves in the world, which is dramatically cleaner than coal, but we've blocked most of that sales. So if we would allow China and India to convert their coal burners to natural gas, that would cause a 20% reduction in emissions in the world. We would save the world by selling our natural gas and stop selling our coal. Does that make any sense? You can use any that you want.
Sure. Again, I'm not perhaps as knowledgeable about the natural gas aspect of things, but given the government's performance in the context of electric vehicles, for example, they want us all driving electric cars while they continue to drive, Eby, Trudeau, whoever, they continue to drive around in their often at least 6, 8, 10, 12 SUV, gas or diesel burning SUVs. They're not the greatest at setting examples for the people that they rule over. And again, we may very well have the biggest gas reserves, and I have no idea why the government is not developing them and exporting them, and as you said, cutting off the coal. If coal is so nasty, and oil, and it shouldn't be burned, why are we Why do we continue to provide it to India, China?
So think of that oxymoron. British Columbians are pretty much taxed the highest in the world for a carbon tax. Our farmers are taxed. Our food prices are higher. 61 cents on a liter. Yet, we've now provided one of the most amount of polluting coal to the world to create pollution.
It's insane.
So we didn't actually help the environment. We actually hindered the environment.
Absolutely. Canada is contributing to the problem of climate change. If we truly want to believe that that the burning of fossil fuels and a few cows farting is causing the climate to change.
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion that weather modification and cloud seeding has a much greater impact on both the weather and the climate, again, than the burning of fossil fuels and a few cows farting.
I saw a little study to show that a couple of hundred years ago there would have been about 40 million bison on the prairies, and that exceeds the amount of cattle by size today. So naturally, there were more animals farting than 200 years ago. It's not like we've increased it.
Sure.
It's actually diminished.
Yeah. The government mentality definitely seems to be do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
They're setting extremely poor and in some cases completely counterproductive examples as compared to what they expect their citizenry to do. And whether it's, Bill, whether it's the COVID thing, the SOGI, the climate crisis, I'm often described as a conspiracy theorist. Well, I've come up with 4 responses to that comment, that derogatory comment toward me. I'll try and remember all 4 of them. I just about got them down. First one is, I am a conspiracy theorist. My pronouns are told you so. Another one is what some people call a conspiracy theory, I call a spoiler alert. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a bullshit analyzer. And last but not least, and perhaps my favorite, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth?
Time.
About 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can stick any time frame in there you want, but
yeah.
Yeah. And we saw that countless times throughout the COVID plan/scamdemic.
You know what I'm really excited about? You represent an independent voice, and the duct tape is off. And
it's never been on
and
for me.
In today's politics, all of the members of the legislature will vote their leader's party line, which means all of their vote. So freedom, and call it a conspiracy theory or not, but to just have open discussion on 1, 2, 3, 4 ideas is healthy. To
Absolutely.
have no discussion and say this is the mandate, we're all voting for Bill 36, and everybody goes yay without discussion because they'll get fired or kicked out, is not democracy.
No, there's little or no democracy in our current governments. They are much more accurately described as dictatorships. The simple fact that we have so-called party whips, and yeah, you will vote the way the party of the leader wants you to vote. Otherwise, your job is in jeopardy. Yeah, it's. I don't know how we got here. I think it's
healthy. It's extremely healthy to have discussion.
Absolutely.
And everybody can say, I disagree with you 100%. No problem. But at least it's on the table and everybody gets to think about it. Right?
The very definition of democracy is debate and discussion, and at the end of the day you vote. And generally speaking, it takes 50% plus one to pass something.
Actually, on the beauty of that, one thing that always inspired me in my life was Hyde Park in London, England. And anybody could stand up on a soapbox and talk.
Absolutely.
Everybody had the freedom to say that. And some really crazy stuff came out there, but it's nice to actually listen to them. Just
Sure.
to see. There might be something about UFOs. Who knows, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So anyhow, at the end of the day, to be able to have a healthy discussion, and the job of this person speaking is to provide enough evidence, enough material to have people truly think about the reality of what they're trying to present. And to just say, forget the evidence. There's nothing to read here. There's just, this is our mandate. You must vote for it. That's shutting down discussion completely.
Yeah. Discussion has been shut down. More, and dare I say, morals and ethics as well.
Yeah.
Again, different levels of government have so-called ethics commissioners, and I scratch my head and find myself wondering, what show me anything that is ethical that has happened in government lately.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Jordan Peterson, which
Sure.
has done, don't quote me, 6 or so tweets, and a couple of them may be against Justin Trudeau, is now has the government body of the universities clamping down on him and trying to take his license away, right?
As far as I know, Jordan Peterson's license has been revoked, and he was instructed that he would have to take some re-education courses.
Kind of sounds like a Uyghur camp to me in China. What do you
Pretty
think?
much a Uyghur camp, yes. Yeah, and how does this so-called College of Psychologists or whatever, how does it define re-education? Is it brainwashing? Is it indoctrination? You will comply with the way we think, Jordan, or you'll never get your license back.
So those, let's just say those 2, 3, 4, or 5 people are now setting the standards for the world. Who are they? How do they have that right to set that standard?
You're referring to the people at the college who are dictating?
Yeah, the ones that are going to tell Jordan how he has to think.
Yeah, well, I personally, I see little or no difference between those colleges, again, whether it be psychologists, physicians and surgeons, whatever it is. They've all been taken over by government bureaucrats. There was a time, not too terribly long ago, when the people running those colleges were actual, in the case of Jordan Peterson, they were fellow psychologists.
Yeah.
Physicians and surgeons was physicians and surgeons. It made perfectly good sense that you've got a body of senior people who are determining how the profession should function. But like I say, now it's government bureaucrats, and all of the people in all of these different professions are being dictated to as to how the profession will be run and what's tolerated and what isn't.
Well, Earl, it's been a lot of fun to get to meet you, and I want to thank you for your servitude, and I want you thank you for speaking out, where many could just sit at home and watch TV and say, not my problem, I don't care. It takes guts to stand up. It takes guts to speak out, and some of these meetings I'm sure you get hammered on, and that's a warrior. You're a warrior fighting for freedoms. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was
And
very
I
much
wanna-
involved in the Freedom Convoy.
And listen, I don't know if you win your riding, but you have an opportunity right now to get the word out to the community, to this province, on some of these issues that are typically completely muffled, right? So you are the spokesman for freedom. And I commend you for that.
Thank you very much, Bill. An honor to meet you and chat with you. I just want to make it clear that there's at least 15 of my fellow independent candidates throughout the province that I'm aware of. As you well know, the Liberal Party imploded on August 28th, I believe it was. And I'm not remembering exactly how many Liberal MLAs there were at that time, 20 some odd, I believe.
26, yeah.
Okay, 26.
Roughly, yeah.
They're all of a sudden they find themselves orphaned. They are looking for a party to go to. Many of them have gone to the Conservatives and literally displaced Conservative candidates who were already in that riding. And of course, those Conservative candidates who were displaced by the incoming Liberal, they're angry. So again, whether it's Liberals or Conservative MLAs, many of them are now choosing to run as independents. And I'm not convinced. Basically, I describe myself and those other 15 or so as real independents. When we became independents, virtually none of us have any previous political experience. We're getting, and most of my fellow independents are on the pretty much on the same page in terms of the COVID, the SOGI, the climate crisis. We're freedom fighters. But I describe all of these other independents who are sort of parachuting into independent. I describe them as fake independents. And I would encourage all voters, especially those who, there are actually a couple of ridings. Comox Courtney is one, and Penticton Summerland, I believe, is the other. They actually have 2 independents on the ballot now. As I'm sure you know, you will never see 2 Conservatives on the same ballot or 2 Liberals or 2 NDP on the same ballot. They have their little leadership races and whatever, and they come up with one. But like I say, in at least 2 BC ridings right now, there are 2 independent MLAs. And that's really going to create confusion for the voters in those ridings unless they do their research and determine whether either one of those candidates is a real independent or what I describe as a fake one, just a former Liberal or Conservative MLA who has parachuted in, like I said, just because they were orphaned when the Liberal Party imploded.
So a career politician.
Exactly. And they're running as independents purely for political expediency. They want to get elected, and I strongly suspect that many, if not all of them, who are elected, in very short order after they're elected, they will either go back to their original party or to one of the parties. They are party politicians, corrupt party politicians as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, Errol, once again, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.